Hello, everybody. Welcome to this exciting live streaming event with our guest, Jenny Adin-Christie, in collaboration with the Toy Academy. So in the next hour, you're going to learn some of the fundamental skills of working with gold and silver wire embroidery. My name is Leah. I will be your moderator today. And if you have any questions at all during the event, please leave your comments in the blue chat box that's below the viewer, or you can use the chat on Facebook and YouTube. I'll be keeping an eye on those comments throughout the event. We'll get to as many as we can in the time we have available. Another thing I always like to tell everybody that's tuning in live is to let us know where it is that you're watching from, and maybe any projects that you're working on yourself that you'd like to share with the community. That chat box is always a great place to build a little bit of community and even crowdsource sometimes. Now that's enough for me. It's time to introduce Jenny. She is our professional hand embroiderer and designer. Jenny, I'd love for you to start out by telling us a little bit about your background in embroidery, and then also a little intro on this project that we're working on with you today.
Hello everyone, it's really nice to be with you all today. I am a professional embroiderer. I trained at the Royal School of Needlework back when I was 18, which is about 25 years ago now. So I've been working as a professional embroiderer ever since. Do a combination of teaching. I teach from my home studio and all around the UK and also around the world, and work to commission, so a huge variety of commissions, and also do my own designs, my own embroideries as well. And the project we're going to be working on today, we're going to be looking at goldwork. So goldwork is one of the specialities of my training. It's one of the things that we focus on, having trained at the Royal School of Needlework. And it, of course, has a great link to the Toy Academy of Craft, who are hosting this workshop today. The Toy family have been producing metal threads for the last 300 years, since their foundation in 1685. And so those metal threads are what we're going to be using today to embellish a garment. So I'm going to be working on a denim jacket. So this is a denim jacket that I purchased just at a second-hand stall. And we're going to show you how to turn a very basic garment like that into a rather sumptuous and gorgeous garment by upcycling it with metal thread embroidery. So these skills that we're going to show you today are some of the fundamental techniques of metal thread work. They look really impressive, but they're not difficult to master, and they achieve a really beautiful impression. So I'm showing you here just on the lapel of the jacket, and I'm going to be then working on the other lapel of the jacket and showing you how to combine all those threads.
Perfect. Well, that sounds really exciting. Before we get going, though, Jenny and viewers, we have a short video that I'd like to show you. It is on Toy Academy, so that's going to roll before Jenny really digs in for us here.
Since 1685, Toy, Kenning and Spencer have been creating the finest regalia, insignia and identity products for royal, corporate and private clients all around the world. A family business, we have had a royal warrant since Queen Victoria and have been nurturing traditional heritage crafts and skills for centuries. Within the business is Benton & Johnson, where these skills and crafts are still used today to weave the finest ribbons and threads in the world. It is here that we draw, twist, flatten and spin gold, silver and metal wire into a fantastic array of threads used to embroider the finest of products for the catwalk, military parades and royal coronations. It is our dream to share these endangered skills and crafts with enthusiasts around the world through the Toy Academy of Craft. Using our Benton & Johnson gold and silver threads through a series of tutorials and classes, we will teach enthusiasts the skills they need to embroider with gold and recreate historic embroidery pieces, or add royal sparkle and glamour to your clothing and home. Each tutorial is delivered by a world-class tutor and is accompanied by a kit containing all the thread and materials needed, including the much sought after Benton & Johnson gold and silver wire threads. Join us in preserving the past and creating history together.
All right, and finally, I'd like to draw your attention to something just below your video. It's in the link in the video description. Craftsy and Toy Academy of Craft are presenting you the classic Royal Oak Leaf and Acorn Take-Home Kit. So that exclusive kit has everything that you need to create something historically significant with an elegant and professional finish. All of the materials are included, and it makes the kit really convenient for you to use. So add a touch of gold to your own wardrobe with a make-at-home Acorn embroidery kit. So you're going to want to order that at the introductory price, but you want to hurry because quantities are limited. And again, the link to that kit is available for you in the video description. So take a look, check it out, and it'll probably be handy for you to tackle something like today's project. So without further ado, Jenny, I'm going to hand it over to you to get us started, and I will keep an eye and see if any questions come in as you are working through.
Okay, lovely. Right, so we'll get started. As we were just saying, the design that we're putting onto the jacket today is an oak leaf and acorn motif. So it's a symbol that's been linked to royalty for generations, really. And it really does give this rather sumptuous, elegant look to a really basic garment. And one of the key things when you're selecting a garment to work for metal thread work is that it needs to be something fairly substantial. Denim is a brilliant fabric as the base fabric because it needs to be quite strong, quite densely woven. If we do it on a soft fabric, a stretchy fabric, the gold work isn't going to be well supported. So something fairly sturdy. So a jacket, you could think about doing it on a wool coat, the lapel of a formal jacket, something like that. So the motif we're going to be doing is introducing you to some really key skills that you could use within this design and apply that design to a garment of your own. Or you could take those skills forward and work them into your own design to apply to your own garment. So we'll look steadily through the various techniques and hopefully give you plenty of confidence with how to approach those with your own piece. So the first stage of the process is transferring your design to the garment itself. Obviously, if we were just doing it on a plain piece of fabric, that's fairly simple. But if we've got a pre-made garment and we're doing it on something like the lapel, that can be a little bit more tricky. It's also really important that embroidery, particularly gold work, being so weighty, is worked taut in an embroidery hoop. Because if we have the fabric soft at all, the gold work is going to collapse into the fabric and cause wrinkling and buckling, and it's not going to sit well on the finished garment. So somehow we've got to get that pre-seamed section of garment into an embroidery hoop to work it. So we'll look at the first stage of that. The first stage is going to be transferring the design onto your fabric. So we've got here your design motif. Now, the design motif is included in the project kit, and I've traced that onto the piece of tracing paper that we've included as well. So just using a fine line marker, laying the tracing paper over the top of the motif, I've traced that out nice and accurately. It needs to be on tracing paper because we need a really nice firm material to work with for the transfer process. Now, traditionally, that motif would be applied to the garment by doing a technique called pricking, which is using a needle and working around the outlines and pricking them with tiny little holes, and then rubbing a pounce, which is usually ground cuttlefish or something similar, French chalk, something like that, rubbing that through the tiny holes to transfer the design. That's a very laborious process. So we're going to look at something slightly simpler today. So we have the design traced onto the tracing paper, and I'm going to flip that over to the reverse side. And within the kit project, we've got a piece of tailor's chalk. I'm going to snap a piece of that off so that I can get to the side edges of that. And I'm going to rub that thoroughly over the reverse of the design. It's important to build up a good coverage of the tailor's chalk. So don't just go over it once, go over it lots of times until you've built up a nice layer of the chalk. Keep working over until you've got at least kind of 6 layers of chalk over there, and press nice and firmly so that that builds up thoroughly. So once you've got a nice layer of chalk, And we're then going to bring the garments into position. You would want to do this on a hard work surface. So just clear your work surface and place that on. I'm just going to show you how to transfer that onto this plain area of the garment here. So we take the design, shake off the excess chalk and turn the design over onto the denim. And then I'm going to use just an ordinary ballpoint pen, just a nice firm pen, to press over that design. So we just work around. Be careful not to press so hard that your pen actually goes through the tracing paper, but press reasonably firmly. You might like to do a little test on the side first to make sure that your design line is pressing through. And the idea is that the pressure of your pen over the lines is going to transfer that chalk onto the garment. So it's a very nice, swift way of transferring the design lines on. So working over, and don't worry too much about exact accuracy. This design can be reasonably spontaneous, and I'll show you a few ways that we can encourage the design to kind of evolve as we go. So if you wobble a little bit with your design lines, it really doesn't matter, just to give a basic line. And then take the tracing paper away, and you'll be able to see the outline of the chalk on the garment. I'm then going to use a permanent marker pen. It's important that it's permanent just in case the garment is going to be dry cleaned or washed later on. And I'm going to go over my design lines. I'm just using a black here. Traditionally, we would tend to paint a design on with acrylic paint and a fine brush, but that of course is quite tricky to be accurate. So the pen is a really good way of doing that and is something you're likely to have at home. So rather than drawing over the whole line for you now so that you can see the whole process, I think we're fairly clear on that. So we print the design on, work over the lines, and then any excess chalk will be blown away, and then your design is on there permanently while you do your work. So we'll take that away for now and have a look at actually working our design. Now you'll see that my design lines look a little bit brighter here. That's because I've painted mine with some acrylic paint so that you can see my design lines a little more clearly on the screen today. So that's an alternative option if you prefer to. Also, gel pens work quite well to give a nice clear line on a dark garment, because dark garments are of course a little bit harder to see. So the next process is applying your garment to a base fabric, and this allows us to work then in the hoop, and as I was talking about previously, allows us to pull it nice and tight because we must have that drum tight tension to successfully work the gold work. So what I've done ahead here is I've placed my piece of silk organza. This is an Italian silk organza, so densely woven but very sheer, and I've placed that into my embroidery hoop. I haven't, however, pulled it tight. It's quite loose at the moment. You can see the fabric moving there. And then I've placed the lapel of my jacket flat on top of that. I have lined the grain of the fabric up. So the straight grain of my silk organza is running with the straight grain of my denim. And that's important just to avoid potential distortion. So I've laid that down, and then I've taken pins and pointing in towards the center of the design area, work round and pop your pins in, pointing inwards like that. That helps to keep the fabrics as smooth as possible. So just a number of pins round the area of your design to hold that flat. And then to attach the embroidered panel to the silk organza, I'm using some herringbone stitching. So we're just taking the needle down through the organza. If you don't know herringbone and you're a bit unsure about that, it's really not important. You could just do over sewing around the edges. It will do the same job. But herringboning is actually just a couple of back stitches. So we take a back stitch into the garment itself. So a back stitch into the denim, and then a back stitch over the edge into the organza. A back stitch into the denim, and then a back stitch out into the organza. And those stitches are a decent size. They're not tiny little fiddly stitches. They're good big stitches, really overlapping that heavy seam around the edge of the lapel. So that's just temporarily fixing our lapel down to the organza. And the organza is allowing us to keep the work in the hoop. It's also going to act to stabilize the fabric while we work the stitching on top. And on completion of the design, we'll be cutting the excess organza away. So that's not a permanent fixture. It will just sit behind the embroidery. It's also a really good method if you're using a fabric that's very slightly stretchy or has a bit of movement to it, like a wool or something like that, perhaps on a coat. The organza will give it more stability. So once we've herringboned all the way around the edge, you can see 3 of my edges I've done in advance there. There's no need to spend lots of time doing the herringbone. It can be fairly random and it will do the same job. And I've done that, you'll notice, with a bright red tacking thread, so that later when I finish the project, I'll be able to take that out easily. So now I can take out all the pins to get those out of the way so that they're not going to catch while we're doing the embroidery. So as I said, it's important that that organza is loose at that early stage, because now we've got a loose garment applied to a loose base fabric. And we can now, in the hoop, ease the organza tight. So we're pulling the fabric of the garment taut together with that of the organza. If you started with taut organza and applied the loose fabric of the garment to it, you don't then have the ability to ease that tight and achieve that lovely tension over both fabrics. Tightening the screw of the hoop and just gently easing that organza tight and smooth all over. Take a little bit of care with organza. It can tear if you pull it too aggressively, so be a little bit careful. And the excess flaps of the organza, I'm just going to tuck up from underneath and pin them to the top of my frame so that they can't fray and they can't catch in my work as I go. So we're now going to look at padding the design. Padding is really, really important for gold work because obviously it raises the surface, it gives it a lovely 3-dimensional effect, but it also allows the gold to sparkle and glitter much more because the light's catching it from different angles. So we're working with felt padding here, and this is a bamboo felt padding. It's a really nice thin but strong and sturdy and good quality felt. It's difficult to use things like acrylic felt that are a little bit kind of thick and uneven. You want a really nice good quality fine felt, and we're choosing a nice sort of rich gold color so that it tones in with the gold work. Now, to allow you to get those design shapes onto the felt, we've taken the paper pattern, which comes in the kit, and we've cut that out. So I've cut out the acorn shape. I'm just going to lay that onto the felt and use that to cut out my acorn shape. Now, because we're going to fill this with padding, you want to cut that just a wee bit bigger than the paper pattern. So just about 1 millimeter bigger all round. Again, it doesn't need to be incredibly accurate. And that gives us our felt shape. Now, if you've done any gold work before, you may have done this process by building up layers of felt using small and progressively bigger layers. We're going to do it slightly differently today. This is a quicker method, but also a really effective method for the type of gold work we're doing on top, because it gives a really, really firm padding, which will support the metal threads really well. So we place the felt shape down on the design, and you can see that I've started to do that here. I've taken my yellow sewing thread. So this is just ordinary polyester sewing thread. Polyester's good. It's got a good life to it. If we use silk, it tends to degrade over time. So polyester's fine. We lay the felt in position and line it up with our design lines that we've transferred onto the fabric. And then we're going to stab stitch it down. So we're simply going to bring the needle up on the outside of the shape and take a stab stitch down into the edge of the felt. Those stitches are about 1 millimeter in depth, a little bit less than 1/16 of an inch, and stabbing down. And I'm leaving a gap at the bottom. So what I suggest you do is you catch it at kind of key points to begin with, maybe 5 stitches or so around the perimeter of the acorn, just so that you get it in position. And then you can go back and add your stitches close together. So we're trying to seal that felt down to the fabric so there's no gaps for the padding that we're going to put inside to leak out. So nice and firmly stitched. If you take your stitches too far into the padding, then you're going to flatten the edge. So we don't want that. So don't take them in too far. And then bring your needle to the surface and just pause there while we then fill the acorn. So I'm going to use some pure sheep's wool filling. This tends to fill much more firmly than, say, polyester filling. So we can pack it in, and it's nice to use natural fibers as well. So we've taken just a little bit of the filling, and we're just going to lift up that gap that we've left at the base of the acorn. Best to leave the gap at the base because it's the least obvious point for that stuffing point. If we do it at the top of the acorn, we might lose the lovely rounded shape. So we're going to push that padding in just a little at a time. Don't try and force too much in one go. You'll tend to get quite uneven padding. But we do want to pack in as much as we can so that the shape is really thoroughly filled to give that really nice dense effect. So give it a bit of a press all over and check that that's nice and solid and full. Just a little bit more at the base there. And we're then going to seal down that remaining edge. If you get any little fibers sticking out at the bottom, just trim those away so that we've got a nice clean edge.
Now, Jenny, I have a question that came in about the stitches that you were just showing. It comes in from
Sure.
Amy. Are the stitches going all the way through the fabric and the organza?
Yes, they are, definitely, because we're using the organza as that base layer. And the organza is going to be permanently stitched to the reverse of the piece, but when we finish, we'll cut the excess away up to the edge of the embroidery design. So yes, it is going all the way through.
Thank you. And then a quick reminder from me to anybody that is just joining us. Jenny is taking us through a demonstration of the classic royal oak leaf and acorn. This is a take-home kit that you can get for yourself. There is a link in the description and you're going to want to jump on that. We do have a limited number of supplies, so go ahead and check that out. But this is going to be your take-through demonstration of what you can do with that kit. And yes, it is available for replay. So if you missed something or you want to come back to it later, it will be here for you. All right, Jenny, I'm going to send it back to you. Thank you for that.
Wonderful, it's a pleasure. So I've now sealed down the remaining space around the edge of the acorn cup there, so that we've got that lovely smooth contour to the edge and lovely domed appearance to the work. So we're going to get that lovely rich texture that we're looking for to show the metal threads off to their best advantage. So I'm finishing my thread by just doing a couple of little stitches there into the felt. 2 stitches is perfectly adequate to seal off the thread, and then I'm going to bring the thread to the surface and trim off the excess. And I'll talk to you a little bit. We didn't really look there at how to cast on the thread, so we'll have a look at that with the next section. So the next section, we've got a couple of techniques to embellish the acorns, one slightly simpler, one a little bit harder. So we'll start with the simpler one, and that's to use a little bit of applique of gold kid leather. So again, we've got a little piece of gold kid leather in the kit, and you use your paper template to lay that on and carefully cut around the edge. So this just needs to be the acorn top rather than the cup, just the top section. And so I've pre-cut that here, and that will fit onto my acorn here. Again, it's sensible to cut that just a spot bigger than the paper pattern, because of course it's got to span the depth of that domed padding. So that's our little piece of kid there cut to size. So casting on the thread, again, we're just using the gold polyester thread, nice and strong. And I'm going to simply put a knot at the side of my work. And then I'm going to work 2 stitches into the edge of my felt. And again, 2 stitches is perfectly adequate to secure my thread. And I keep the knots on the surface. That's the technique you would use. It's known as a waist knot technique when you're working in a hoop. We don't want to put knots on the back of the work and have that lumpiness there. So we put it on the top. We start embroidering and then eventually cut the knot away. I'm going to place the kid down on top of my felt base that I've prepared, and that lovely domed padding will give a gorgeous shine to that kid. So this is a really quick, effective way of getting that lovely gold effect. And just as we talked about with the felt, we're going to initially catch it at key points. So bringing the needle up in the denim on the outline and taking it down into the perimeter edge of the kid. Again, the stitch is about 1 millimeter in size, so quite small. The kid is really nice and strong, so it will take quite a small stitch. You will find it's a little bit tough to push the needle through the kid, so you might want to use a thimble. And once I've got those initial stitches in, I can now go around and add my stitches nice and close together. very similar manner to the felt padding. So they're about 1 millimeter deep and about 1 millimeter apart, so that the edge is nice and tightly bound down to the denim. So that's a really nice, quick method of achieving a polished goldwork acorn. Now, the other method we're going to work on, the alternate acorn, is a little bit more tricky, but uses one of the fabulous traditional metal threads, which are produced by Benton & Johnson as part of the toy family businesses. And this is a rolled metal thread. So I'm just going to pause with my kid there, and we can come back to that if we've got time. I can cut my knot away because I've started embroidering, and I'm bringing in that beautiful plate. This is known as plate, and it's a rolled metal thread. So the gold thread is extruded into a long length and then rolled to flatten it. So it gives one of the most lustrous metal thread work techniques that there are. And it looks difficult to work, but it's actually relatively simple. So now that I'm going to be working with metal threads, I'm going to start applying some wax to my stitching thread. I've got my polyester thread again, and I'm just going to place my thread between my thumb and my beeswax and just draw the thread across just a couple of times. Don't pull it sort of into the wax like a cheese wire, just draw it across. The wax is there to protect the thread and to smooth it. So when we're working with metals, they can tend to grind against the sewing thread, and that can cause it to snap. And the wax just protects the thread and makes it a little bit stronger, a little bit easier to work with, and it helps to sort of grip to the metal and prevents it slipping. So we take the end of our metal plate, and we're going to fold the end over to make a little hook. So just folding over about 3 or 4 millimeters. I've cast on my thread again with a knot and a couple of little stitches at the side so it's secure, and we're going to start at the tip of the acorn. I'm going to bring my needle up on the edge of the felt and take a stitch over that little hook in the plate. So that stitch is going to sit down into that little hook that we've made and pull that into place. I'm then going to work what's known as a locking stitch. So just taking a stitch into the felt to lock that stitch I've already done. Locking stitches are really, really important in metal thread work because we're trying to secure pure metal threads, and they're very slippery, so those stitches give us more control. We then lay the metal thread across the acorn, and we're going to stitch it again on the far side. So bringing the needle up on the edge of the felt, taking it over the top and down to the other side, again running that stitch alongside the edge of the felt. We pull the stitch down firmly and then pleat it back to the far side and lock it again. So that locking can be done anywhere into your felt, it doesn't matter where, and that secures it. So on the far side, we're going to bring the needle up, and the space I'm leaving between the needle and the previous pleat is half the depth of the plate because we're going to overlap by half. So we lay it across, take a stitch over the top, and take our needle down, tucking towards the existing pleat of plate about halfway, and pull it down. So it's going to overlap. Pull it down firmly and bend it back to the far side, and then lock it again. The locking is absolutely essential to give you the control and make the metal threads behave. So to the far side, leaving a little gap about half the depth of the plate, over the top, tuck down and towards the previous pleat, pull the stitch down firmly so that it sucks around the padding, and pleat it back to the far side and lock it. Make sure that your stitches are sitting in the denim and not in the felt, because that's going to ensure that all of the felt is covered and we have that lovely effect of the gold just sitting against the blue of the denim. And pull down and pleat. And that's all it is. We just keep pleating from side to side. So with a really beautiful polished metal thread, we get this really sumptuous, rich look. And this technique and this material has been produced by Benton & Johnson, as we were saying, for over 300 years, and has been used in embroidery throughout that period on military uniforms, on regalia, on couture items, all sorts of beautiful pieces of embroidery.
Now, Jenny, another question has come in, actually two. So first, does the gold polyester thread and the beeswax, are those in the kit?
Yes, they are. Yep, the toy company have made beautiful little tiny cakes of beeswax by hand, especially for each of the kits. So you get your own block of beeswax, and all the sewing threads are also in the kit so that you're just ready to go. The only thing that you need to add is the garment that you wish to stitch onto. And again, if you don't want to work this onto a garment, you can work it onto a piece of fabric, which you can frame afterwards, or anything you like. It doesn't have to be a garment.
And then speaking of where you are working at the piece, whichever it is that you choose, Amy wants to know if the back of the piece will end up with large laps of thread across the piece that stays there.
Yes, it will. So you will be able to see the stitches across the back. It's actually a rather beautiful effect on the back with the stitches lapping back and forth. But yes, you'll be able to see that. But in this case, it will be the reverse of the lapel, so it won't be visible when the garment is worn. If you were concerned about that and it was on a garment where that mattered, you could always stitch a lining onto the reverse to hide the stitching.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to pause in a second on that technique. I think we've mastered that one. Do make sure that when you're stitching, you pull your stitches down really firmly so that that gold does suck down to the base fabric, and that you're working those locking stitches really firmly as well. Metal thread doesn't behave well if your stitches are loose and are moving around. And if you feel that things are still moving, add more locking stitches. So I'm just going to work a couple of stitches again through my padding, just so that I can anchor that thread as it runs out. And then we'll look at how we're going to embellish the cups of the acorns. That's a really nice opportunity to add lots of texture at the base of your acorns. And these techniques are really fun to do, not too taxing at all. Some metal thread is quite precise and requires you to be concentrating hard, but this one's quite a fun one to do. So we're just going to get rid of those knots. And at the base of my acorn, as I go into the cup, I would probably do a couple more pleats if I was doing this as a final effect. But I would just simply cut off my excess plate at the bottom, so a couple of stitches to cast on. And I'm going to cut off the excess plate, leaving a little bit of a tail. And we give you plenty of plate in the kit. So often these techniques, you might quite like to have a bit of a play on the side of your fabric first. Just get the handle of the technique before you go on to the real thing. So I'm just going to catch that down with a couple of stitches, and that tail is going to be covered by the work I do on top. I'm now going to bring in here my selection of spangles. Now, spangles are an absolutely gorgeous metal threadwork material. Spangles are just like a sequin, but instead of being stamped out of a sheet of plastic, these are made of pure metal. And you'll see that they have a horseshoe shape. So they're a curl of metal with a slit. So they're made of an extruded length of metal, which is sliced almost like a sliced sausage rather than being punched from a sheet. So again, what we're going to do is just come up through the spangle in the center of the acorn cup. And then I've got some little tiny gold beads, which I'm going to bring in to act as a stopper with the spangles. They're also sometimes known as paillettes. So we thread on a little gold bead. These are 24 karat gold beads, and then we pop straight back down through the spangle, and that bead will lock the spangle in place. So moving a little to the side, you may want to add a little bit of wax to your thread as well. That will help to grip to the spangles and grip to the beads. So take another spangle, slide that down, and then pick up a bead and back down through the spangle. And I suggest you use a couple of different sizes of spangles. So here I've got 4mm spangles, which I'm using towards the center of the acorn cup. And then I'm going to use 3mm spangles to the edges, so we get a slightly shaded effect. Make sure that your spangles overlap, because that gives a really nice coverage of the felt and gives this beautiful sparkly appearance. So I'm now going to pick up a 3mm spangle and use those more towards the edges. So we've got that sort of intensity of size towards the middle, and then fading out to slightly smaller spangles near the edges. And you can pack those in to give really nice coverage of the felt, and it gives that wonderful kind of crusty texture as a contrast to the shine of the plate. We've also suggested that you add a few little seed pearls, and pearls work beautifully with metal threads. They just give that lovely softness and just add a little bit of highlight. So again, we just stitch those down. There's nothing desperately complex about those. The wax will help to make the thread stronger as it's going through the beads, because of course you want that nice strength for a garment that you're going to wear. So I would suggest, rather than dotting those throughout the acorn cup, that you work a little cluster of them to suggest the highlights of the lights on the cup. I'm just going to work a little group of them. Now you may find that the spangles don't give you as smooth an edge to your acorn cup as you might like. So it's also a good idea to use some of the little tiny gold beads to add around the edge, and you can use that to sort of shape and redefine the edge of the acorn cup. And remember your locking stitches as well. So particularly when working with beads and slippery items, it's best to do locking stitches regularly to ensure that you've got extra stitches in there to pack the beads down into the felt, pull them down nice and firmly, and ensure things aren't going to move about. Or potentially, if you caught a bead whilst wearing the garment, that's going to lock that in place and prevent that moving. So lovely simple technique that we use to fill the base of the acorn. So I'm just going to lock that off with a couple of stitches. I won't make you watch me the entire filling of that. It takes a little while, but not difficult. And you'll see there that I've got my spangles in a little tray, which I've clipped to my frame with a magnet. A good thing to do with that at home is to use a jam jar lid with a little bit of velvet or felt lining the inside, pop your beads in, and then use a magnet underneath your frame to hold the jam jar lid to your work. And then you can work nice and close to your embroidery and just pick them up and work backwards and forwards. So we now need to add the oak leaf, and we're going to use a couple of techniques on that to give that another layer of interest. It's going to be slightly flatter work as a contrast to the oak leaves. I'm going to again wax my thread for this, and we're going to do a little bit of couching. So for this, we're introducing another couple of metal threads, which are produced by Benton & Johnson. These are threads rather than a wire. So we've got, if I pull the end there, you'll see that they've got a cotton core inside them, and they're bound with a very fine gold wire. This one has a bit of texture to it, so the cotton core has a heavier thread bound around it inside, and then bound with the gold, and that gives it that lovely bumpy appearance, and it's called a check thread. This one is smooth, and this is called a passing. Again, it's a smooth cotton core with a metal wrapped around it to give that contrast technique. So it's quite nice to mix the different textures together to give interest. So we're going to work the stem of the acorn to begin with, and I'm going to cast on in the same way. So placing my knot at the side, coming up on my design line, and working a couple of stitches to secure my thread. 2 is plenty again. To give a nice end, I'm going to fold my metal thread in half. So I'm leaving quite a short tail going to the left, and then a longer tail coming to the right, because my longer piece is going to come round my oak leaf, and my short piece is just going to come out to meet my acorn. And the folded end is a really nice way to give a neat finish to the tip of a design line. So we're going to take a stitch over that loop and pull that down. So that secures that loop. And again, I'm going to work a locking stitch so that that stitch can't work loose. So locking on the line, making sure you keep to the design line so it's thoroughly covered. And we're now going to couch. Now couching is simply sewing over a metal thread to pull it down to the fabric. But it's important that it's worked well, and particularly for a garment, because of course you're going to be wearing it and it's going to endure some abrasion from that wearing process. So what's important is that your needle rises to the surface at the side of the couching threads, and it's at 90 degrees to your fabric. You take a stitch across, and the width of that stitch fits the 2 metal threads, and it descends into the fabric, again sitting at a 90-degree angle to the fabric. That sounds very technical, and it can be a little bit kind of scary to start with, but it's something you get used to. The idea is that we're almost stapling the metal thread down to the fabric. If we bring the needle up, and we angle the needle towards and under the metal threads as we go down, you're going to push the metal threads over each other, and they're going to buckle and not sit precisely to your design line. So those little staples. Now again, I'm going to separate the threads and work a locking stitch on my design line. And I would do that about every 5 or 6 stitches to give that extra bit of security. And it means that your metal threads, instead of fighting against your sewing thread, are nice and locked into place. I'm then going to separate my threads, and we've got this extra little loop here. So this is in the design we've given you, but it's the sort of thing you could add into your own design. So rather than just doing a straight stem, add a little bit of a loop just to give it a bit more interest and texture. So we're just couching that single metal thread out around that loop. So the check thread has that beautiful sparkly texture and will really catch the light when it's being worn. The tighter the curve with your couching, the closer your stitches need to be together. So it will be difficult for you to see those stitches on screen because the idea is that the yellow thread blends into the colour of the gold. But keep an eye on the spacing. They want to be generally about 2 millimeters, about 1/8 of an inch apart, but round a tighter curve a little bit closer than that so that they're nice and secure. And what you don't want is when you're wearing the garment and you catch it, for there to be any movement. So check, just flick the metal thread and check that there's no movement there. So we're back down to the base, and then we're going to step out along the main stem again. I'm going to leave that single thread behind, and we're going to head out into the oak leaf. So couching is a fairly rapid, effective way of achieving all sorts of designs on a surface. And if you aren't the sort of person that likes to follow a set design, this is the sort of piece you could easily make up yourself. Doodle a swirly oak leaf and just couch away. And to give a bit more interest, I'm now going to introduce the passing thread combined together with the check thread. Double couching always looks really effective. The 2 metal threads kind of cushion each other and encourage them to sit well. You'll notice that I'm now leaving a tail to the passing thread. That's because these threads need to be taken through to the reverse of the work to finish them off. They're not the sort of threads like the plate, which are a pure metal thread. As we've seen, they've got a cotton core and that they can fray if you pull the end. So we need to be able to take those through to the back and seal them off there. So couching the 2 together for that little bit of contrast of texture, and I'm going to head off around the curls of my oak leaf. And again, as we go around the tighter curves, I'm going to increase the density of my couching to ensure that those sit really well. And every so often, every 5 or 6 stitches, I'm going to stop and do a locking stitch on my design line. I like to stitch from the outside of the curve to the inside, tends to sit better. And just keep encouraging the metal threads round and working over the top. You'll soon see if you haven't couched close enough together because the metal threads will start shifting about. And then a locking stitch again, and we're going to head off around that inner curve. Now there's nothing to say that you have to continually couch those 2 metal threads close together. You might like to separate the 2, and that can give a really nice effect, just adding a little bit more light and life to the design. So as you come out round the curve of the oak leaf, perhaps think about starting to separate them and couch them individually for a section, and then bring them back together again. So you can really just doodle with this technique, and very versatile.
Jenny, while you're continuing to work, do you have time to take another question?
Sure, yeah, please.
Okay, great. This comes from really 2 viewers are wondering the same thing. So this is Arlene and Sue are wondering about the care for specifically a garment you would wear if you were going to apply this design. So what special considerations would you do to choose the garment? And then also, once you do choose the garment, how would you care for a garment that is using this type of thread? What are the practicalities involved?
Yes, so it's obviously a really important consideration when you're going to put this much time into a piece of metal thread work that is going to be on a garment. The main thing initially is the choice of fabric. As we said, it needs to be sturdy. So you couldn't do this on a fine silk blouse or a t-shirt kind of material, something like that. It's not strong enough to support the weight of the embroidery. You think about this kind of embroidery is used on military garments, regalia, heavy pieces of metal work. So we need something strong. Denim is fabulous. Something like a heavy wool would work really beautifully. You can imagine this on a lapel of a gorgeous wool coat. Something like a canvas, a heavy sort of cotton, anything like that. So just think about the density of the fabric, the weight of the fabric to support the weight of the gold work. In terms of the longevity and the care of the garment, this is not something we could be laundering. So we can't be putting this in the washing machine. I think it's probably reasonably obvious. So we're looking at using this technique on garments that we're not going to need to launder regularly. So it would be on a formal coat, a formal jacket, kind of outerwear garments rather than things you'd wear close to your skin. So we're looking to not be washing it. Now we can spot clean it, so you might be able to take it to the dry cleaner and get them to spot clean an area rather than washing the whole garment or laundering the whole garment. And the other thing to do is dry cleaning. It is suitable for dry cleaning. So the dry cleaners that we've talked to have suggested that if you take it for dry cleaning, you would stitch a little piece of felt or a soft fabric over the top of your gold work whilst it goes in for cleaning, just so that when it's in the drum of the dry cleaning machine, it's not going to catch and scratch on the metal threads and that they're not going to catch on other things. So just tacking a little piece of soft fabric over the top will protect it, but otherwise it's fine to dry clean. But we wouldn't recommend that it's cleaned regularly every once a week or whatever. It's going to be more like every few months or once a year for a coat or something like that.
All right, thank you for that. I'm going to leave it back to you. We have about 10 to 15 minutes left on this demonstration.
Okay,
so Jenny's on her way.
So we're just now looking at the final technique that we're putting into this design, and that's the use of a beautiful metal thread known as pearl. Pearl is a spiral of wire. Pearl, P-U-R-L, is a spiral of wire. So purling is the process of spiraling a wire. So these are handmade by Benton & Johnson at their factory in Bedworth in the Midlands of the UK. So you can see it's a much stiffer kind of springy metal thread. And if I stretch it out, you can see that sort of spiral structure. So to work with this, again, we're going to use the yellow polyester threads. And I've put a little bit of beeswax on that in advance of using it. And this is an excellent technique for stems. Because it's nice and rigid, it forms a really nice crisp line. Really good for stems and outlines. So when we use it, it tends to be a little bit kind of damaged a little bit in the packet from where it's being coiled up, so it looks a little bit bumpy. So you want to take both ends and just give it a gentle stretch, just a little bit of a stretch. It's only about 1/2 centimetre, and that just eases the pearl and smooths it into a straight line and easier to work with, just opening the structure up. So this one, being a pure metal rather than a thread, as the two we've just looked at, this one we can just cut the end and use it directly without having to plunge it. So we just clip off the end, lay that down, and we're going to stitch across it. So we're couching again, but this time the stitches are going to disappear into the spiral of the wire. So we come up, and being a spiral, the stitch wants to be slightly angled rather than being straight. And then it will pop into that spiral, and you should be able to almost just hear that little click as it disappears. So the needle comes up on one side, goes down on the other. I'm tucking my needle towards the pearl, so the stitch is wrapping round and pulling through. And you want to be stitching about every 2 to 3 of those little beads that form the structure of the pearl. And again, it's a good idea to do locking stitches from time to time onto your design line so that you've got that extra bit of security. And what I quite like to do, as our stitches disappear in this case, is step back and do a stitch where I've already stitched just one. So it's kind of a policy of 4 forward, 1 back. And that for a garment means that if the pearl gets caught, it's got that extra bit of safety in there to secure it down. So we couch along. And then the joy of this material again is at the far end, we can just cut it off and we don't need to be plunging it through to the back. And this is also used for the stem, the vein along the center of your oak leaf. And it's used as an outline around the around the acorn that's covered with your kid leather. So it forms a really beautiful outline as well. So we're just going to clip that off at the end. And then I would tend to do a couple of stitches close together at the tip, just to lock that down a little more thoroughly, because as you can see, it's very wiry, so it needs that kind of substance. And being a wire, you can then take your tweezers and give that a bit of a pinch and a bit of a shape. And because it's a metal, it will hold that shape that you manipulate into it, and it gives a beautiful contrast of texture to your other textures. So it's starting to look really sumptuous. And I know we've got a little to go, but it's very little time that we've put into that. And we're getting very close to a really beautiful effect on our garment. So now just to show you how to deal with the tails of these metal threads. So wherever we've got a tail, we've left a good kind of 3 centimeters, 1.5 inches or so of metal thread. And to get rid of those, I'm just going to clip off the end so it's a clean end. And then I'm going to use a spiky tool. This is an awl, but you can use a large needle, anything you've got with a nice, ideally tapered spike. Push that in through the denim and wiggle it round so that you've got a little bit of space for this metal thread to go through. You want there to be enough room for it to go through comfortably. I've then got a large needle and a little bit of strong thread, or you could use your yellow sewing thread double. I've folded that in half and I'm going to pop the 2 ends into my needle so that I've got a loop, and we call that a lasso. I'm going to pop that needle down through the hole that I've made and pick up the tip of the metal thread and pop that through to the back and just ease that through. And it should go through as easily as that. If it's not, you need to make your hole a little bit bigger. And then on the reverse of the panel, I'm just going to bring up the existing panel that I've done. So this is the finished piece here. So you can see where I've couched round the perimeter of the oak, just separating on occasion to give that interest. And I've used my pearl to give the center vein, just couching that in the same way, and added a bead at the tip for interest, and then used the pearl to outline my leather as well. So just those same techniques repeated. On the back, you can see where I have my tails of metal threads, and I would then want to just take a little bit of my yellow thread and sew over those to catch them back. So trim them back, and then a few stitches on the reverse, just over sewing the tails just to secure them and stop them catching. So just binding them down, particularly for a garment, be a little bit more thorough with the binding down so that they're not going to catch. And that's just with that yellow sewing thread again, and clip away. And then you can see here how once I've taken it out of the frame, so I've undone my red herringbone stitching with my tacking thread, removed it from the organza, and then I've simply trimmed the organza away around the edge. And if we wanted to, we could trim that much closer. So taking that right back to the stitching so that there's very, very little visible organza on the back. And as we were saying earlier, if you didn't want to see the reverse of your work, then you could put a lining over that. And there we go. So that's our finished effect. And I hope you agree that that is a really lovely way of fairly rapidly producing a beautiful and quite couture looking finish to a basic garment that was very, very cheap to buy. And I wonder if we've got any other questions.
We do have a few. First of all, Barbara did drop in to say that, Jenny, you are so good at describing what you are doing. So thank you so much for this fantastic demo.
That's nice to hear.
Amy's got another question, and Amy, drop in any more details if I don't get this entirely correct. Amy asks, why not just continue down the whole length of the stem? And since that question just came in, I believe that is tied to what you were just showing around the leaf. Do you think you know what Amy's talking about?
I think so. So if we have a look at the finished piece here, you can see that I've just taken my pearl down to this intersection here, rather than continuing it all the way down. And it's just a way of giving that sense of it branching out from the main stem, really. If we just do one fluid line all the way down, it can look a bit stiff. So it's just breaking it up a little bit and having that contrast of the various metals coming together.
Oh, she says that, I thought you said the same stem wire was also used for the leaf vein. So I think we're talking about when you split them off.
Okay, yes, so we've got the pearl is used for the stem coming into the acorn, and then it's used as a separate piece coming into the leaf, with those cut ends just butting into the base of the leaf there. Perfect. Does that answer the question?
I believe so. I'll keep an eye and see if anything further comes in. We've got another user, F. Carnes, asking how stable is beeswax pulled onto silk when couching metal threads? So will the wax on a silk thread cause the gold metals to tarnish faster? Because I find that silk couching threads do fray a bit.
Yeah, no, the beeswax is an excellent material to use with silk thread. The use of silk thread for couching is a difficult one because silk thread will degrade much more rapidly than if you use, say, a polyester or a cotton thread. So consider using silk really carefully, particularly for something that you are going to wear and is going to endure a little bit of wear and tear. You imagine the rubbing that happens with the couching on the surface. So think carefully about using silk, but if you are using silk, yes, beeswax is an excellent product to use with that. It doesn't affect the silk and it doesn't affect the metal threads at all. I have a colleague who did her PhD thesis on the use of beeswax on threads, and she proved that it does nothing other than good. So it just helps to smooth your threads, make them stronger, and it has no detrimental effect whatsoever. I really don't like the synthetic versions of beeswax. They can tend to be a lot more greasy. They can mark your fabric. So I like to stick to the traditional natural beeswax.
All right, Sarah Bush has our next question. She wants to go back to the gold kid that you used. She wants to know, what thread did you use to surround the gold kid? It really looks finished.
Okay, the thread is just the yellow polyester thread that we've got in the kit. So this is it's a Gutermann brand thread, but you can use any polyester thread. Just wants to be a nice, smooth, strong, fine thread. And it does give a lovely, neat finish around the edge. But then I would come back in with my pearl and add that over the top just to hide those stitches, because it does give a nicer finish.
And I think with the time we have left, we've got one last question. It did come in from a few viewers. They were curious about the overall dimensions of the finished project design.
Okay, so I would say the finished project is about 8 centimeters long by about 6 centimeters wide. So ideal for the lapel of a jacket.
Somebody else put in here, let me find it quickly, an idea. Oh yes, Laureen thinks it would look well on a velvet-topped jewelry box as well.
It would, absolutely. And as I said, if you don't want to do this on a garment, that was just our suggestion for kind of upcycling, giving gold work a different use, really. And gold work was always meant to be on garments rather than on fixed items behind glass in a picture. That's what it's been used for throughout time. So, but certainly on the top of a box, something like that would look really sumptuous and lovely.
All right, well, Jenny, I would love for you to take a minute. If you have any final thoughts before I send us all on our way with a few reminders, I'm going to give you the floor. Okay, well, just thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed it.
It's really a great privilege to be part of the new Toy Academy of Craft, which is a wonderful endeavour to try and preserve the art of gold work into the next century. Gold wire drawing is a endangered skill, and so this is a great way of trying to encourage those threads to be used and enjoyed and used in different ways. I'm just thinking out of the box a little bit with how they're employed. And so I really hope that this will encourage you to try your hand at a little bit of gold work and really enjoy it.
And where can people find you, on social media or elsewhere?
Yes, you can find me on social media under Jenny Adin-Christie and follow along with all the things that I do, and under the Toy Academy of Craft on social media as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So this brings us to the end of today's demonstration. Again, that was Jenny Adin-Christie, and she led us through a demonstration of a fantastic kit that is available for you. So you can get your own classic royal oak leaf and acorn take-home kit, and it is now at an introductory price. But again, we have limited supplies, so click the link in the video description for more information and to get your own. You can go ahead and review this once you receive your kit if you would like to see the demonstration again once you have the materials in your hands, but you will have all of the materials and all of the instructions available to you as well, so you can make this design. As far as that goes, it is time to say farewell for now, but I am sure we will have more opportunities to connect with you later. Jenny, this was a fantastic demonstration. Thank you for sharing your talent with us, and thank you to everybody for tuning in. We hope you enjoy your kit when you get it, and we hope to see you soon. Happy crafting.
Bye-bye.